The snow globe of my world had always been Alaska, not the tourist postcard Alaska of cruise ships and choreographed dog sledding, but the raw, unforgiving, quiet Alaska that breathes beneath layers of ice and ancient spruce. My reasons for being there, particularly at the remote cabin nestled deep within the Chugach Mountains, were less about adventure and more about excavation, a painful, necessary digging into the past. My grandmother, a woman whose silence was as monumental as the peaks surrounding us, had died a year prior, leaving me this cabin, this legacy of isolation, and a single, cryptic instruction in her will: find what was lost. She'd been a trapper, a woman of the land who spoke more to ravens than to people. The cabin was a testament to her life. Rough-hewn logs, a wood-burning stove that grumbled like an old bear, and windows that framed an endless expanse of white. I'd arrived in late October, just as the first serious snow began to fall, turning the world into a hushed monochrome dream. My days were a rhythm of chopping wood, melting snow for water, and poring over my grandmother's journals, a labyrinth of handwritten observations, weather patterns, and unsettling sketches of things that seemed to squirm just outside the realm of natural history. One evening, as the last amber light bled from the sky and the cold began to prick at the cabin walls, a profound stillness descended. It wasn't just the lack of wind, it was an absence of everything. The usual creaks and groans of the timber, the distant howl of a wolf, even the subtle hiss of the stove, all fell silent. It was as if the world held its breath. I sat at the rough-hewn table, a steaming mug of tea warming my hands, and watched the snow fall. Each flake was a tiny, perfect star, dissolving on the window pane. Then a sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a dull thud, barely louder than a heartbeat in the surrounding silence. It came from outside, near the back of the cabin, where the woodpile stood stacked like a silent sentinel. I dismissed it as a branch, succumbing to the weight of the snow, or perhaps a snowshoe hare, startled by its own shadow. But a prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way up my spine. The stillness of the snow felt less peaceful now, more like a suffocating blanket. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that isolation played tricks on the mind, that every creak and groan of the cabin would be magnified in this profound quiet. Yet the memory of my grandmother's final haunting words echoed in the quiet air: find what was lost. The next morning, the unease had not dissipated. It had merely settled, a cold residue in the corners of my mind. I woke to a world reborn in pristine white, the night's snowfall having erased all traces of the previous day. Yet, as I stepped outside to replenish the wood, I noticed something, a single distinct indentation in the fresh powder right beside the woodpile where I'd heard the thud. It wasn't a footprint, not exactly. It was too large, too circular, like something heavy had pressed down, then lifted cleanly away. No drag marks, no scuffing, just a perfect, inexplicable depression. My breath plumed in the frigid air. A shiver, unrelated to the cold, ran through me. I knelt, examining the mark. It was about the size of a dinner plate, its edges sharp and defined. What could make such a mark? A bear would leave claw marks, a deer hoof prints. This was something else. A knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. I looked around, scanning the unbroken expanse of snow, searching for anything that might explain it. There was nothing, just the vast, silent wilderness. That night, the sounds returned. Not a thud this time, but a soft, rhythmic scratching, like long nails dragging across wood, coming from beneath the floorboards, directly below my bunk. I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs, straining to hear over its frantic beat. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. It wasn't a mouse. The sound was too deliberate, too heavy, and it wasn't constant, but punctuated, as if whatever was down there was moving slowly, purposefully. I grabbed the old hunting rifle my grandmother had kept by the bed. Its cold metal, a small comfort in my shaking hands. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't rational. This wasn't a branch or a hair. This was something beneath me, something scratching at the very foundation of my sanctuary. The silence outside was absolute, pressing against the thin walls of the cabin, amplifying every terrifying scrape. I told myself it was the wind, forcing a branch against the underside of the cabin, but the rhythm was too distinct, too alive. What does it want? The question, raw and unbidden, screamed in my mind. The scratching continued, moving slowly from one end of the cabin to the other, a chilling parade of unseen presence. Then, it stopped directly beneath the hearth. A different sound emerged, a low guttural murmur, too indistinct to be words, too human to be an animal. It pulsed through the floorboards, vibrating through the very soles of my feet. It sounded like a plea or a demand. Fear, cold and sharp, became my constant companion. I started sleeping with the rifle beside me, the lamp burning low all night. I checked every lock, every latch, every window, but the events escalated, defying all attempts at explanation. The circular imprints appeared closer to the cabin, sometimes right at the threshold of the porch. The scratching under the floorboards grew bolder, more insistent, sometimes accompanied by a faint, rhythmic tapping against the logs of the cabin walls, like knuckles rapping. One afternoon, I was at the sink washing dishes, when a shadow detached itself from the edge of the dense spruce forest just beyond the clearing. It was tall, impossibly slender, and moved with a fluidity that was utterly unnatural. It swayed, almost like a piece of cloth caught on the wind, but there was no wind. It paused, a dark silhouette against the white backdrop, and I felt its gaze, a palpable weight, pressing in on me through the window pane. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a bear, not a moose, not anything I knew. It was too tall, too gaunt, too wrong. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching, observing. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it dissolved back into the shadows of the trees. I dropped the plate, the ceramic shattering on the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silent cabin. My breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't some animal. This was intelligent. This was watching me. What does it want? The question burned in my mind, now laced with a desperate urgency. Its movements were too precise, its observation too deliberate. It was hunting, but not for food. It was searching, and I was beginning to suspect what it was searching for. My grandmother's journal, open on the table, seemed to hum with a dark energy. The cryptic sketches, the veiled warnings, they suddenly took on a terrifying new clarity. The snow came down in earnest then, a relentless blizzard that trapped me within the cabin's fragile walls. The world outside became a swirling vortex of white, visibility reduced to mere feet. The wind howled like a banshee, but even above its mournful cry, I heard it, a deep resonant moan that seemed to emanate from the very air around the cabin, vibrating through the foundations, through my bones. It was a sound of immense sorrow, ancient and profound, mixed with a chilling hunger. Then the true horror began. Taps, loud and deliberate, echoed on the window panes. Not just one window, but all of them, in quick succession, as if something was moving around the cabin with impossible speed. I huddled in the center of the room, the rifle clutched to my chest, my eyes darting from window to window, expecting to see a gaunt face pressed against the glass. But there was nothing but the swirling snow. The scratching under the floorboards returned, more violent now, accompanied by splintering sounds. It was trying to get in. It was no longer content to observe. It was actively seeking entry. Panic, hot and sickening, surged through me. I scrambled for the lamp, turning it higher, as if light could ward off the unseen terror. The rhythmic thudding against the log walls intensified, followed by a sickening thump against the roof, as if something heavy had landed there. I screamed, a raw primal sound that was instantly swallowed by the blizzard's roar. It was everywhere, above me, below me, surrounding me. The cabin, my sanctuary, had become a cage. I could feel its presence pressing in, an invisible weight against the walls. It wanted something, and I was beginning to understand. My grandmother's journals, filled with fragmented clues, led me to a single, horrifying conclusion. She hadn't been searching for something lost. She had been trying to hide something or someone. A sickening crack echoed from the back wall, followed by a rush of frigid air. A sliver of darkness appeared in the logs, widening with another tortured groan of wood. It was pushing its way in. I raised the rifle, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold it steady. What was I even aiming at? A shadow? A spirit? Then, a low guttural growl vibrated through the air, emanating from the widening crack. It was closer now, impossibly close. The sound wasn't of an animal, but of something ancient, something that had witnessed eons of frozen solitude. A thin skeletal hand, impossibly long and pale, snaked through the gap in the logs, its fingers tipped with what looked like polished bone. It felt for purchase, its movements slow, deliberate, searching. My mind raced, images from my grandmother's journals flashing before my eyes, faded drawings of a towering, emaciated figure, half human, half spirit, known in old Alaskan folklore as the Qalupalik, a creature of ice and darkness, said to steal away the lonely and the lost, pulling them beneath the frozen surface. But these weren't just stories, were they? My grandmother had known. She had known what was out there. The hand flexed, and the gap widened further, revealing a glimpse of an eye, a cavernous, empty socket reflecting the dim lamplight, yet filled with an ancient, unbearable sorrow. It wasn't just hunger. It was a profound, aching loneliness. The murmur returned, clearer this time, a whispered name, almost indiscernible beneath the wind's shriek. Anna. Anna. My grandmother's name. The rifle felt like a toy in my hands. This wasn't something to be shot. This was something to be understood. The terrible truth, the chilling realization, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. My grandmother hadn't just died. She had become one with this place, with it. This wasn't a monster seeking a victim. It was a specter of grief, an echo of what was truly lost. And it wasn't here for me. It was here for her. It was searching for the physical remnants of the woman it had loved, the woman who had lived here, who had etched her life into these very walls. It wanted her back. In that terrifying moment, staring into that cavernous eye, I understood. The Qalupalik didn't steal. It absorbed. It took the lonely, the forgotten, and made them part of its own endless glacial existence. My grandmother hadn't been leaving me this cabin as a legacy. She had been leaving it as a warning, or perhaps a final resting place for what remained of her. The skeletal hand reached further into the cabin, beckoning, its fingers almost brushing my hair. I didn't pull away. A profound, bone-deep sadness settled over me, eclipsing the terror. My grandmother, silent and solitary, had found a companion in the snow, a lover in the ice, and now that lover had returned, searching for her essence, for the pieces of her soul that still lingered in this lonely cabin. I lowered the rifle. What do you want from the ghost? I wanted to give it peace. I wanted to tell it she was gone, truly gone, absorbed into the landscape it represented. But how do you tell an ancient sorrow that its love is forever lost? I looked around the cabin, at the worn armchair, the faded quilt on my bunk, the scattered journals. These were the last vestiges of my grandmother, the echoes of her life, and it wanted them. It wanted her. My gaze fell upon a small wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards, a secret compartment my grandmother had shown me as a child. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried wildflowers, was a single tarnished silver locket, her mother's, she'd told me. It was the only thing of hers she ever truly cherished. I picked it up. The locket was cold against my palm. I walked slowly towards the widening crack, towards the skeletal hand still reaching, still searching. The Qalupalik's gaze, fixed on the locket, was suddenly intense, an almost tangible pull. It wasn't demanding. It was yearning. It was the deepest, most primal form of grief, manifest in ice and shadow. I extended my hand, offering the locket. The skeletal fingers closed around it, surprisingly gentle, almost reverent. The growl softened into a low hum, a sound of profound acceptance. The empty eye socket seemed to deepen, to draw in the very light from the room. And then, slowly, deliberately, the hand retracted. The crack in the log sealed itself, the wood groaning back into place, as if the intrusion had never happened. The blizzard still raged. The wind still howled. But the palpable presence, the crushing weight of sorrow and hunger, was gone. I stood there, shivering. The rifle forgotten on the floor, the locket gone. The cabin was silent once more. But it was a different silence now, imbued with a new, chilling understanding. My grandmother wasn't just gone. She was part of something else, something vast and ancient that still roamed the frozen wilderness. And I had become a bridge between worlds, a witness to a love story far more terrifying and profound than I could ever have imagined. The snow continues to fall, blanketing everything in a pristine, deceptive white. Sometimes, when the wind dies down and the silence presses in, I hear it, a faint mournful hum carried on the frozen air. It's a lullaby, I think, or a lament, and I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that out there, in the endless, unforgiving expanse of the Alaskan winter, something is always searching, and it will always remember.